Hello everyone. My name is Rahul, and today we are going to talk about solenoid valve. Listening to solenoid valve, uh, why should you study solenoid valve? See, solenoid valve is right now to study solenoid valve is very important. It is used widely in automations. In even in our school projects and college projects, we used in robotics, and it is used widely in industries for automations. So now getting into solenoid valve. So if we split two words, let us understand what is solenoid valve. So solenoid valve is consisting of two words. First is solenoid and second is valve. Solenoid, all we know is from our basic electric. If we have a soft core iron and if we wind it with a copper winding, it becomes a solenoid. And what is valve? As a mechanical engineer, all we know is valve is something like to open the flow or control the flow, right? So we can consider tap as our valves, and we see valve. We are actually on daily basis we are surrounded by valves. We see valve many times. So how this combination of solenoid and valve is used in automations, let us understand. So what is solenoid valve? A solenoid valve is an electromechanically operated valve. The valve is controlled by electric current through a solenoid. Okay, so if we consider, okay, like let us take an example of our normal tap. That is also a valve, right? So what we do is we open the tap by our hands. We give feed by our hands, and the water comes. The same work we close also that tap with our hands, applying torque and couple, right? The same work is done here by electrical methods. So it is an electromechanically operated valve, and it can be further used in many types of automations, which we'll discuss later. So it is an electromechanically operated valve. So now there are many types of solenoid valves available. So first one is a two-way solenoid valve, second is three-way solenoid valve. Then even in solenoid valve, in their operations, there are two different kinds of solenoid valve. One is direct acting solenoid valve, other is indirect solenoid valve. Then the solenoid valves are obtained. This direct acting two-way solenoid valves are obtained in two configurations. First is normally open solenoid valve. Second is normally closed solenoid valve. Okay, so which we will discuss. So what is two-way solenoid valve? Two-way solenoid valve is something a simple form of valve which we can say that if we open that valve, the flow of fluid, air or some water or any type of fluid will flow. If we close that valve, the fluid will not flow. Thus, it has a one line to flow, only has a one way to flow. That is called two-way operating solenoid valve. Here from the slide, you can see that the open end, which we can see is we can consider is an input, and after the valve opens, it gets through. The second type of solenoid valve can be obtained as a three-way solenoid valve. This three-way operating solenoid valve is used in many types of automations. There is uh, widely used solenoid valve. Here it is like see. Let us take an example where you can use this. If you are having a pressurized air from compressor, and if you want to control a pneumatic cylinder, you can Google it out what it is. So with three-way solenoid valve, you can control a double-acting pneumatic cylinder. Basically, you can just uh, stroke that out and again bring that slide in, right? So here, first the back portion of this outlet would be connected with compressor, and the front portion facing to us, which we can see in our slides, are for diverting the flow, whether we want to give the flow to outward stroke or the inward stroke. You can just Google it out what pneumatic cylinder is. So here you can control your flow, that if you want your flow to go in this direction or in left or right direction, you can control the flow, right? So this is three-way solenoid valve. It's useful many times, many. And now, okay, let us see what is normally open and normally closed solenoid valve. So let us consider a two-way solenoid valve. So in two-way solenoid valve, when you are not operating, you are not giving any signal to your solenoid to open or close valve. It is in its ideal condition. And the solenoid valve the valve is open or closed, that is called normally open and normally closed. So when you are not giving any types of signal to our valve by solenoid and your valve is allowing a fluid to flow through it, it is called normally open solenoid valve. And when you are not providing any signals, it is in its ideal form, and the fluid can't pass through it, it is called normally closed. Generally, in our cases, we can use normally closed. We can come across many normally closed solenoid valve, but also normally opens are used in many places. So we now know what is two-way solenoid valve, three-way solenoid valve, normally open solenoid valve, and normally closed solenoid valve. Right? In three-way solenoid valve, normally the fluid is flowing through any ends. There are two ends through which your air or fluid can, like water or something, can pass, namely right or left. So generally, normally open and closed are to restrict the flow or to allow the flow is used in two-way solenoid valve. So now let us discuss what is direct acting solenoid valve and what is indirect acting solenoid valve. Okay, before going to direct acting, indirect acting, let us discuss what is operation of solenoid valve. So basically you need some force to open the valve or close the valve, right? Even if you are doing it by hand, you need some amount of force to open it or close it. Now all we know that if the fluid is flowing in very high pressure, you need more load to open the tap, right? And if the pressure is somewhat less in fluid, the low force which we applied on the tap would be less. So all we know is force equals to pressure into area. So here the for controlling our valve, which is called solenoid force, like what we have in our tap, which we are giving manpower. So the solenoid force can be given as P equals to pi d square by 4, where P is the pressure of the fluid and d is the diameter of the orifice. Now see, if you are having a large cross section which is to be opened, it requires much more power. Like we know force equals to pressure into area. If you increase the area, of orifice, normally the force which you require to open the valve is going to be larger. So our solenoid force is proportional to the pressure of the fluid and the diameter of the orifice, because normally we are dealing with circular orifice, so it is written pi d square by 4. So this is what operation of solenoid valve is. Now let us come to direct acting solenoid valve. What is direct acting solenoid valve? Now let us see first of all figure. See, this is what the direct acting solenoid valve looks like. See, right now the fluid is flowing through it. Like it, if you consider this in its ideal condition, then it is called normally closed normally open solenoid valve, right? Because the fluid is flowing through it. So here, if we see the components of this direct acting solenoid valve, it is comprised of one spring. Then you can see one plunger in that small orifice, and the bigger two stands are its electromagnet solenoid, which will control its opening and closing. So now let us discuss in detail its working and operations. Right now, the media flows through small orifice which can be closed by a plunger or a rubber gasket at the bottom. So now plunger is like, see, if you are having an open hole, you have a plunger and a rubber gasket to vacuumize, like to prevent the leakage of the fluid. So by that you can close that small orifice and prevent our fluid from flowing through it. So we are having plunger. Now to make a normally closed solenoid valve, you require a spring attached to the plunger, which will always compress spring attached to the plunger, which always downforce the plunger, right? So we require some amount of force to open that valve, which will be provided again further by a magnetic field. So a spring is attached to the plunger to make sure that our valve is orifice area is always closed to prevent any leakage and somewhat to have a smooth mechanism, right? Now, let us go. The electric coil is positioned around the plunger, and when the current is passed through this electric coil or solenoid, magnetic field is created which will attract the plunger upwards. You can see in the figure, which will attract the plunger upwards and it will move up, and thus this valve will open. So let us recall what we have done. So see, first of all, there is a plunger in which a small rubber gasket is present. Rubber gasket will seal our orifice properly so there is no leakage. Now this plunger is surrounded by one spring, is attached to one spring to make sure that it is closed all the times, right? If like small force won't let this valve to open, binomial forces. Now to open this valve, we are having a electric coil surrounding it. So when the current is flowing through this coil, an electromagnetic field would be produced, magnetic field would be produced, will which would have an attracting force towards the spring and plunger, and thus our plunger will move upwards. Thus our valve would be open. This way you can operate your solenoid, direct acting solenoid valve. Now one important property of direct acting solenoid valve is direct acting solenoid valve does not require any minimum operating pressure or pressure difference. If we'll later in this video discuss what is indirect solenoid valve. Generally indirect solenoid valve needs some pressure difference to operate. It requires to open the diaphragm, which we'll discuss. It requires a pressure difference, but that is in direct acting solenoid valve you can control without any pressure difference, and it has a minimum operating pressure, right? So let us see one animation about this direct acting solenoid valve to make this concept more clear. See here, they will close the switch to electrize the coil. The plunger, this is a plunger which will open, again the spring would be compressed and fluid would be flowing through it. This is in closed switch condition. Again they open the switch, the coil get demagnetized, and the fluid, now the gasket is attached, the rubber gasket is attached to the valve, and this thing is closed. So the fluid won't flow through it. Okay. So next thing we'll be talking about indirect solenoid valve. Now indirect solenoid valve works on different mechanism from direct solenoid valve. The main difference in indirect solenoid valve is indirect solenoid valve consists of a one diaphragm which moves up and down to control our flow. So now, as we know that in direct solenoid valve, we don't require any minimum pressure difference to activate our open or close our valve. But that is not true in case of indirect solenoid valve. Indirect solenoid valve needs minimum zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.5 bars of pressure to control the valve. Like basically 0.1 or zero point 0.5 bars of pressure should be there to move diaphragm up or down by pressure difference. Okay, so main difference is pressure difference. It works on pressure difference. Now as we know that in direct solenoid valve we were having a spring attached to plunger which ensures that our valve remains always closed, which is a normally closed condition of solenoid valve. Same way in indirect solenoid valve also, above the diaphragm one soft spring is attached which ensures that our diaphragm is always closed, right? So now how do we operate this solenoid valve? So now the membrane of our indirect solenoid valve has a small hole through which a liquid flows. Now see, if this is a diaphragm and from here liquid is coming, then there is one small hole in our diaphragm, which in our membrane, which allows a fluid to move above that membrane, so the pressure remains same in the above and the below portion. So right now the diaphragm is closed. Now what will happen when the solenoid valve will get energized? So we'll provide an external current to our electric coil. So this a plunger will move up, and the above liquid will come down, thus creating a pressure difference between the intake portion and a portion below diaphragm and above diaphragm. So as we know, our object moves from higher pressure to lower pressure. The diaphragm does the same. The diaphragm lifts up and our valve gets open. So thus a pressure difference is created in this way. So yeah, indirect solenoid, important point about indirect solenoid valve is indirect solenoid valve can work in higher flow rates as compared to direct solenoid valve. So this indirect solenoid valve is mainly used in irrigation systems, right? So here we can have one foot of solenoid valve as rest or at normally closed condition and solenoid valve which is active. So normally a two-way solenoid valve, as I told before in this video, are taken in normally closed condition, which is a most general condition. See here the line B, pink line B, which we can see is our diaphragm. The point E is our spring, and point from point A it is shown in diagram that our fluid will enter, and through point F our fluid will exit. Now in between in that pink line B, which is our diaphragm, you can see one small hole which we discussed before, which is a small hole in membrane through which the fluid can go up, and then the coil will get energized. The fluid will get from the upper compartment to create a pressure difference, and the diaphragm lifts up. So let us see one animation about this indirect solenoid valve operation. As you can see, the black one is our diaphragm. The liquid is intake in that portion. Now, as you can see here, there is one pressure difference which should be more than 0.5 bars. Now, slowly the coil will get an electric supply and will get energized. There is one small hole which we discussed in the diaphragm section. Now the small fluid will flow through it. This will get energized. Yeah, see, that's the electric coils or solenoid which will get energized. See, the fluid comes out. You can see the wave shown in animation by blue color. And as the pressure difference is created, the fluid has came out and the diaphragm has lifted. See, the slowly now when the electric current is taken out from coil, again the fluid goes in the upper part of the diaphragm, and the pressure difference which was created before by electrolyzing the coil is now minimalized, and the diaphragm is again in its normal position, which is shown in this animation. Okay, so that's what about indirect solenoid valve. So the main difference between direct and indirect solenoid valve is about the diaphragm, and indirect solenoid valve can work on higher pressures, right? So now, okay, we have learned a lot about solenoid valve, like basic principles we have learned about solenoid valve, its types and all. So where we can see solenoid valves, where it is has so now let us discuss about applications of our solenoid valve. So mainly you can see solenoid valve in washing machines and dishwashers. We know that washing machines and dishwashers required water flow for certain period of time, and after that, let us take half an hour. And after that half an hour, the water flow should be automatically switched off. So that work is done by solenoid valve. See, if I manually do all this work, that is no point that after half an hour I have to go there and all. So you can find solenoid valve in washing machines and dishwasher. Second place where you can find solenoid valve is this our automatic irrigation sprinklers. You can see this water sprinklers in many big lawn and campuses where they have to water a big lawn. So what they do is they set a particular time period for that sprinkler to be turned on to have a water supply. So approximately in 20 to 25 minutes they will give signal to solenoid valve, and the valve will get open and the sprinkler will give water to the lawn. So second application is automatic irrigation sprinklers. Now the third application is to control pneumatic and hydraulic cylinders. As we have discussed in beginning of this video, solenoid three ways. Basically, we have discussed two types of solenoid valve. First is two-way and second is three-way. So for controlling single-acting pneumatic and hydraulic cylinder, you can use two-way solenoid valve, no harm. But to control a double-acting pneumatic cylinders or hydraulic cylinders, you need to use definitely three-way pneumatic, solenoid valve. So to get its stroke open and again to close that stroke. That's fine. To close that part. So you can just Google it out. What is a double-acting pneumatic cylinder? So in double-acting pneumatic cylinder, they use three-way solenoid valves. Again, this pneumatic and hydraulic cylinders are used widely. They are used in several this automations, industrial automations. Let us take an example of our power press. So if I need to push each component to a power press from a bowl feeder, I will design. Uh, I will code a solenoid valve. Like you can control solenoid valve with the help of coding. I touch a controller or Arduino or something. You can control your solenoid valve. So with the help of that, you can insert each component uh, from the bowl feeder to your press, and you can do this types of small automation with the help of solenoid valve. Uh, so what we discussed in solenoid valve is, let us recap. Solenoid valves are of first of all two ways. First is two-way solenoid valve and second is three-way. In two-way solenoid valve you can restrict the flow, and in three-way solenoid valve you can divert the flow. If I want to get flow diverted on left side or right side, you can do that stuff. Then we discussed there are again two on the based of mechanism. There are two types of solenoid valves available, which is one is direct acting solenoid valve and second is indirect. In direct acting solenoid valve, we have plunger and rubber gasket, spring attached to it to control. And in indirect solenoid valve, we are having a diaphragm and spring attached to it, which works on the basis of your pressure difference. Then we have two conditions in solenoid valve, mainly in two-way solenoid valve. First is normally open and normally open condition, and second is normally closed condition. In normally open condition, in without giving any inputs to solenoid valve, the fluid will flow. And in normally closed condition, you have to give some input to flow the fluid to make the fluid pass. So where do you find the solenoid valve if you want to purchase solenoid valves? So the solenoid valves, three-way solenoid valves are actually cheaper. Two-way valve also cheaper. You can find in any electrical stores related to this pneumatic and hydraulic components they are having. You can get solenoid valve, three-way solenoid valve easily at rupees something 550 rupees or approximately around that. And yeah, for the we are having different like people have discovered many accessories also for solenoid valve. If you are using your fluid as air, then it will create a lot of noise, because if you are pumping air at 2 bars or 5 bars pressure, obviously there will be a lot of sound noise created, like air noise created. So in solenoid valve three-way solenoid valve, we are having something muffler at the back. So you can attach that muffler to restrict, like to minimize the noise created by this solenoid valve. So that's it about solenoid valve. I hope you got clear understanding. If you are having any queries, you can message me or email me. Thank you. I hope you like the video.